Hi, Mac. Welcome to the show.
Hello. Thanks for having me, Andy.
It's great to have you, Mac. Yeah, I'm looking forward to having this chat because I normally have the privilege of knowing a lot of our guests on the show quite well. I've spent some time with them. Maybe they've been on one of my programs. Maybe I've met them somewhere else at a networking meeting or something like that. But this is actually the first time, my first opportunity to really get to know you as well. And I was really excited to bring you on the show because you reached out and we had a chat. And I've been looking at some of your stuff and some of the projects that you've been doing, and they're really amazing. And I could tell straight away that you've got big ambitions and big goals and are going to go on to do lots more incredible stuff as well. So, Matt, maybe for some of our listeners and for myself, could you tell us a little bit more about you, your business, and what you're currently doing in the HMO space?
Yeah, so firstly, thanks for that very complimentary introduction, Andy. We are still learning as we go along, so we've only been really open and trading as a company since January 2020, but we've done quite a fair bit. We've kind of been accidental landlords since 2007, where we kind of acquired through not wanting it actually. So a friend of ours wanted to move down to London, and he was wanting to get rid of a house that he was renting out to students at the time, and we didn't want it because why would we want another house if we're not going to live in it? So inadvertently, we kind of entered into a negotiation, genuinely not wanting this property. And then we managed to get this 3-bed end of terrace house that we picked it up for 120 grand, and now it's worth double that. And then so we did nothing from then on. It got to a point in 2019 where kind of professionally we were in quite difficult places, and it was quite stressful, and I had a health scare, and my wife and I were kind of struggling to conceive, and then my father had a heart attack. So there were all these kind of things that were building, and it felt like there was something in the universe was sort of trying to tell us something. And then we kind of made a decision to do it. So attended a networking meeting, and then enrolled onto an accelerator program, and then we did a 12-month mastermind program with Simon Zucci, and then which is quite recently finished now. We did quite well, and we were one of the 5 top performers of that. And now we're just kind of full-time property investing, full-time since 2020, kind of focusing on student HMOs, professional HMOs. I still quite love a single let.
You got a soft spot.
Yeah, I do. I quite like the pacificity of a single let. So we're always on the lookout for new stock.
So actually, you've achieved quite a lot in a relatively short space of time. And Mark, am I right in thinking that you were or are a pharmacist, and actually that was your sort of your profession?
Yeah. So at the back end of 2019, I was head of medicines management, chief pharmacist for a place in West Yorkshire called Kirklees, and it's a relatively high pressure job. In order to do that, you have to be a registered pharmacist. So I'm still a registered pharmacist actually. And I still do a little bit of consulting on the side, but the main focus now is kind of looking at opportunities in the HMO space, and we're also trying to branch out to development, which is a whole different beast. Kind of principally still the same thing, but a whole different beast.
It really is. I've done exactly the same, and I sort of just recently bought another commercial property, and going through the process of buying another one at the minute, and it is quite different. And particularly if your comfort zone is single lets and kind of HMOs, predominantly residential property. So, Mark, your case study is phenomenal. The numbers are brilliant, and the way it looks is incredible. And I'm really excited to get into the detail of that as well. But before we go down there, I want to talk about, and this isn't normally how I would sort of kick one of our episodes off, but I'm really interested to know how you manage that transition, because you've got from your professional role to your property business, by the sounds of it, in quite a short space of time. So I'm really interested to know how you managed that transition. Did you put an amount aside to sustain you while you did it? Was it reliant on you achieving certain goals and objectives, numbers of properties? How did you kind of manage that process?
So, it's a really interesting question, and so it was a relatively hard finish. I'm of the personality if and it's a shame Leslie's not here, my wife, because she would probably roll her eyes at this point. There's a funny story. I wanted a motorcycle in 2017, and my wife was saying no. So I bought one, and it was delivered to the house at 7 o'clock in the morning on a Sunday, and it kind of, there was a relatively awkward period of time for a couple of hours in the morning where she didn't speak to me, but then she was like, "Okay, you've done it now." And likewise, when we decided to do the property thing, I attended this accelerator course, and straight after that, I said, "I'm going to hand in my notice, and we're just going to do it."
Wow. You literally just kind of pulled the cord and...
Yeah. And I don't think that's for everyone. I think that's just it was very much a sink or swim thing, because I don't think we would have achieved as much as we've done if I was still at work. And I don't think, I think a lot of people do exceptional stuff whilst they're balancing kind of work and family and kind of the extra property stuff. I don't think I could have done that. So it was a hard finish. I handed in my notice in October, September, October, November. So it was January 2020 when we went full time. And that was the period where COVID was just about kind of embedding, which is a really interesting time to leave the NHS, right? So while I kind of saw the system not kind of sagging under this pressure, we, at the time of halfway through 2020, we had 4 refurbs going, four pretty relatively big refurbs. We just finished a student HMO, 4-bed student HMO in Salford. We finished refurbing that. Then we went into first lockdown. That property then got broken into, and everything got stolen out of it. Whilst in the meantime, we had 2 units in Liverpool that we were refurbing, and this one, the case study that I've done, it was just a nightmare. Maybe I would have done things differently. But again, I don't think we would be where we're at now. I mean, I've got a lot more grey hairs here, which they weren't there when I started this.
I mean, I would say that you really did jump in at the deep end. A lot of pressure there, a lot of responsibility, and in the midst of a pandemic as well, definitely not easy. I'm really fascinated by this conversation, actually, about how people make that decision, and when they make that decision to move from the security and routine of having a job, and moving into business full time. And I remember it myself. I was a physio, Mac, and so not a million worlds apart. But the security of that job, and knowing it would always be there, was a huge benefit. And it was. I remember how I felt about leaving that and leaving it behind. And I actually didn't have the balls to do it the way that you did it. I transitioned, so I started to locum, and then I gradually transitioned out, and I would do periods where I was just full-time on the business, and then I would hop back into my physio and keep up my skills and bring a bit of extra cash in. And I've seen people do it really successfully both ways, like you, and it sounds like you work better under that pressure, having kind of a deadline and being able to fully commit. But I've got a question, and I think it's an important question for context as well. Because this is actually something that we talk a lot about inside the HMO community. It's a question I get asked a lot by mentees and things like that. And did you have the comfort of, cash, savings, finance, other revenue that supported that? And I think this is so important, because it's easy, isn't it, to sort of talk about jumping ship and leaving the job behind, and actually, if there's a bit more to it, that's an important part of the story.
Yeah, so you're right, and the additional context is the student property that we'd had that was just ticking along nicely. We didn't do anything with had kind of doubled in price, so we had all this equity sat there, and we didn't feel any kind of wealthier as a consequence of this value, the property doubling in value. So we didn't realise that you could take it, you could refinance it out. I only realised that when I did the accelerator. So I was like, okay, we've got 100 grand here. Let's do it. We'll never get this chance again. Mm-hmm. We'll if needs be, I could always go back. So I'm still registered pharmacist, so I could still always go back and locum. I think it would be dangerous if I locum now. So I don't want to add to the kind of burden of people dying. So there was always that safety net. So yeah, you're absolutely right. It was calculated. It wasn't. I don't want it to seem like it was gung ho. It was relatively. We were quite bullish with it because it was quite a big decision to make because it was a good job. Leslie, my wife, still works 3 days a week, and she's a deputy head teacher.
Okay.
Again, quite a stressful job, but that hopefully the plan is that we can kind of transition to doing this full time together.
Wow.
Because we complement each other quite well. It's a solid marriage, and I'm saying that, and she's not even here. So there you go.
So, I mean, you said you would have done some things differently, but I'm assuming, zooming out, you've achieved a lot in a short space of time. Any regrets at all about what you've done, Mac? Any doubts about, is anything along the course of the last year, 18 months, changed your mind or opinion about what you think's achievable, good or bad?
Yeah. So I guess reflecting on the journey, kind of cliche alert now, isn't it? Reflecting on the journey. I wish we'd done it earlier. I wish we'd done it 5 years ago. We've got the luxury of time now, and it's wonderful to kind of do. So everything that we're doing now is financially benefiting our investors and us, and that's quite a nice thing to be in a position of. I think if I was able to find a network, so the course we did, the mastermind course, was incredible. We had quite a close knit group of people on that course, and within that group, it was incredibly supportive, and the environment itself was conducive to learning and progression. And again, I didn't necessarily have that in the NHS either. So yeah, I guess to answer your index question, it was more about I wish we'd started earlier. Maybe slightly more calculated. It would have been nice if COVID hadn't hit, because I think we would have done.
I think we all would agree with that.
Yeah. I thought I was the only person, but it would have been nice if COVID hadn't put the spanner in the works. Because the worst part with COVID, the worst part was at our worst. Rather, we had 23 rooms that were empty. So going from 4 to 30, I think, in a relatively short space of time was good, but then we had no one in these rooms, and we were just struggling to kind of stay afloat, which was quite tricky.
Wow. So you were literally struggling to fill these rooms because of the lockdowns and just all of that stuff?
Yeah, so when they kind of restricted the movement of people, our business model is predicated on getting rooms filled, so when they stopped that, we were in kind of a lot of trouble. And then we had this break-in, and then everything got stolen, so we had to go through an insurance claim and all that, and it was pretty tough. Like I said, I think I got some of these grey hairs then.
Yeah. It's really interesting to hear you talk about this stuff, and we love to pull this out of people on the podcast, because we don't ever want the show to be a highlights reel, and listening to you talk about this, and clearly, this was an incredibly tough time. Your rooms, what's your average room rate, Mac? Is it somewhere 450, 500?
It's probably, so Salford is probably around the 500 mark.
Yeah.
And then Liverpool is slightly lower than that.
Yeah.
But it's about the 500 mark.
So 23 rooms at 450, 500 is a phenomenal amount of money. Definitely, the scale that gives you sleepless nights, I imagine.
Yeah, and absolutely, there were a lot of sleepless nights, and I think part of it was kind of shouldering the burden myself, and I know Leslie was aware of the so we talking each night, trying to figure out what to do. Fundamentally, though, Andy, we always had the safety net of me going back to work.
Yeah.
So I could have just gone and locum somewhere.
Yeah, I think that's really powerful perspective to have, and it's something that I often try and remind people when they're going through tough times, when things are difficult, they're not making the progress they want. Their runway, that intangible runway that they set them is sort of disappearing before their eyes. And I have to remind people that, look, worst case, you're still the same person, you've still got the same job, you've still got the same experience. You can always go back to that, and you can always go back to that comfort of a job or a role, and then revert. Or you could do it on a part-time basis or something like that. And often when you say that to people, it kind of, I get it. Yeah, I get it. And all of a sudden, nothing's as scary. But it's strangely one of those things that we often don't think about. We often, we kind of pull a cleaver down it and assume that that's behind us. We can never go back and do that at all. But it's just not the case, is it?
Yeah, and I agree. I think we're moving to kind of a world now where the people have portfolio careers, don't they? So ideally, the best case scenario is that we kind of have these HMOs and a kind of set level of income, and then we can kind of progress and do large scale developments. That's our main ambition. But I always quite like doing the pharmacy stuff. I love market access. I love getting patients new medicines. That kind of thing. Really, I really still enjoy that kind of stuff. So if I can do a lot of that, then I'm really happy. I guess now I've got the option of balancing what I do with time, because we've got a choice. So fundamentally, what I didn't have in the NHS was the element of choice, because I had to do certain things that I was told to do. Whereas now it's completely on our terms, and that's quite a powerful thing. I think your point around the cleaver, though, is brilliant, though, Andy, because it doesn't have to be. We didn't have to go. We didn't have to do a hard finish in the NHS. I didn't have to do that. I chose to do that, and whether that was the right thing or wrong thing, I don't know.
Well, it sounds like it was the right thing for you. And interestingly, I had another question, and I think you've just answered it, Mac. And that question was going to be, why did you do all this? Why have you put yourself through all of this pain and stress and anxiety? And you then just spoke about choice. And it's interesting because I was recording something just yesterday, and it's a series for the roadmap, actually, about replacing your income through HMOs. So quickly, rapidly getting from in the job, that position in the job, and building the portfolio as quickly as possible to get you out, and having been able to replace the income. And two of the key things that I talk about are, there are a few, but certainly one of them is understanding the purpose. And why did you do it? What is your purpose? What's the meaning of all this to you, Mac? Why have you decided to kind of throw it all in and kind of go all in on HMOs or property?
So I guess I come from a relatively entrepreneurial family. So my parents are GPs, general practitioners, but they've always been interested in business. So I think it's always been there. Likewise, my sister's really entrepreneurial. She's done loads of different random things. She's worked for startups, and then she's kind of done recruitment, and now she lives in Dubai. And she does, again, very much portfolio thing. So seeing that and seeing that people live the lives that they want to live. I guess, sorry, Andy, let me start again. There's two things, because in 2019, I had those instances, the kind of series of unfortunate events, if you like. And that kind of brought things into perspective, because what I didn't want to do is work myself into a grave and not see the kids. We've got two kids. We've got Olivia, who's going to high school this year, which is mental because it feels like she was only born a couple of days ago. And then we've got Ruben, who's starting year 4. And time's gone so quickly. So a series of unfortunate events happened, and it was just a case of, actually, I want to be around. I want to spend time with you. Because I was leaving early in the morning and then getting back late at night, so I'd rarely see them. That whole hypothesis has been tested with lockdown, I might add. Now I can't get away from them.
You can't book a holiday.
That's right, can't get away, and the kids are always around, which is lovely. So that was the reason why. I think stress at work was kind of physically manifesting itself in health issues for us. And I think at that point I kind of came to the fore where I think something needed to change.
I think for anybody who wants to kind of replicate what you've done, get out of a job or profession that maybe they're not passionately kind of in love with, and do something, build something that's their own, build that freedom of choice. I think you've got to have that deep-seated, meaningful purpose. And I think without it, it's just too hard. It's too hard to try and buy all these properties and pull all the finance and manage all these trades and manage tenants and empty rooms. When those issues set in, and they do, because it's a very mechanical business model, it does get really tough. And I think being reminded of exactly why you're doing it in the first place is so important. So I think it's really, really, really great to hear you talk about it. I think it's something that a lot of our listeners can take away from today's episode.
I'm interested in your journey, actually, Andy, because you're a similar kind of NHS employee, weren't you?
That's right, yeah. So I was a physio. So I trained here in Sheffield as a physio. I had a real sort of interest in anatomy and physiology, and I thought about going to study medicine, actually, but didn't actually think that the lifestyle of being a medic would suit me, and I felt like maybe there were some more flexible options with physio. It turned out I didn't love it, and I kind of kept at it for 6 or 7 years, ultimately, specialised. But I invested very early. I always had an interest in property, not business, I would say. I don't think I was naturally an entrepreneur, but I had a genuine interest in property. I bought my first property very quickly, and that was generating about £1,200. And I just saved and I borrowed a bit of money from my parents. And I put that to good use in 2009. That property went well, it was generating some cash. Combined that with some extra savings and rolled it forwards, and was able to buy the next one a couple of years later, and so on. So that's kind of how my portfolio just organically grew, and it inevitably got to that point where it was quite a substantial part of my income. And then it substantially overtook my income as a physio. And I was running out of capital, obviously. The market was starting to pick up a little bit by then. Things were getting more expensive. And I needed a solution to raising more finance. And it was at that point, that was a sort of a penny drop moment for me. To do that needed a much bigger commitment from me. It needed an actual business model with strategy. It needed brand. It needed a network. And that was when I really committed to building my businesses out. And then off the back of that, Smart Property was born, and that was when I decided to go full time. And sort of like you, there was a period where I eventually did cut it off, but before that I had been gradually stepping away. I've been locuming, taking some of the benefits of being able to contract as a locum physio, and then sort of supplementing all my income and kind of reinvesting it as quickly as possible. And I think for anyone who can do that, it's a great way to manage that transition out of a job. But I think it was the right way for me. I don't think I would have handled the pressure as well as you have managed it, Mac. And maybe being a bit older now, I would manage that differently. But yeah, certainly no regrets about the way that I did it.
Yeah, and I don't want to give the kind of false impression that there was pressures doing what we did. But we didn't have an option, so there was no we didn't have an option of whether we did or didn't. It was, we had to do it. And that was the only option, and that's been our only focus now, is we need to just get things done. I've kind of been guilty of previously procrastinating and putting things off. And then I guess now we just got the focus and the luxury of having the time to focus on things. So we kind of exponential growth now is hopefully what we're doing. So we've got quite ambitious plans for the next couple of years, and that our 5-year plan is quite good as well. But we just need to keep kind of incrementally working towards it.
Well, I'm interested to know about that, but I want to ask you firstly, before we get there, I want to ask you about network and community, because I know that this has been an important part of the process that you've gone through. So I want to talk about that, Mac. Did you have experience, or did you know anybody who had sort of come from an environment where they've been working alongside other property investors? Was that itself a big gamble for you, and just how important has that been to what you've been able to achieve?
So yeah, we are my experience prior to starting our company's called Concrete Property Investments Limited. So prior to Concrete, we had no kind of idea. We didn't even know these networks existed. And in fact, when I was speaking to my best friend about thinking about going into property full time, he was speak to Julie and Ollie, who were the pin hosts of this meeting in Liverpool. So I attended the meeting, and then I spoke to them on the phone afterwards, and I was saying, what do you think? How have you guys managed it? And kind of similar questions as before you did. We've just done it slowly and surely, and I was like, well, I'm not entirely convinced that I don't want to pay 20 quid to attend this meeting, this network meeting. And Ollie at the time kind of gave me a good rollicking and said, look, if you're not willing to spend 20 quid on something that could potentially be really beneficial for you, then I can't help you. And I mean, he kind of gave me a good dressing down. And so after that, it was kind of mind open to people genuinely want to help. Again, that was alien concept to me. There's a huge amount of learning to gauge within a network. Again, alien to me, because why would people give up their knowledge? Why would they do that? But people genuinely want to help, and the kind of the mastermind we've done, we were with some really special people, and they've been open and willing to kind of help on every occasion. So network's been incredibly valuable, and property is a relatively lonely thing to do, I think. So without having that network of people to kind of pick up the phone and speak to, I wouldn't have anyone to speak to.
It's true. Property and business in general can be an incredibly lonely place, and there can be periods of real inactivity where you're just constantly plugging away, trying to push deals through. And I value the network in my community so highly because there is so much value that comes out of that, and it makes me really proud sitting around. I run the HMO Mastermind, and we have about 17 businesses on there. We're all doing incredible things around the country, and just seeing not only the things that they're all doing around the table, but their ability to share and problem solve together and support, and then inevitably do deals, provide assistance, because they all have different professional skills that they can bring to the table as well, is unbelievably powerful. And I think, unquestionably, for me, when I look back at my own journey, being part of a mastermind was one of the biggest catalysts to getting to ultimately where I've got to. I was part of a mastermind group, and it was on that mastermind the idea of doing a big crowd raising campaign was sort of spawned. And I don't think without those guys on that program who were there to encourage us, to support, to help with the process, that we would have done it. And of course we went on and did it, and it was incredibly successful, and we raised a huge amount of capital, and that capital has been invaluable to growing our infrastructure in the investment and management business as well. And at a young age, without that sort of support, I don't think I would have had the knack or confidence to actually do it. And so I can definitely look back and see how valuable that process was. And I think it doesn't even have to be a mastermind environment, just being part of an extended community as well. Absolutely. Going to events. I think local events often get a little bit of a bad rap as well, because I think in truth there are often a lot of people looking for the same sorts of things. They're looking for investments and stuff like that. But there are also good people there just doing what they're doing, and it's nice to know people doing what you're doing. It's comforting. It's someone to call and just have a bit of a whinge at. Yeah. It's someone just to reassure you that they're experiencing the same sorts of problems as well, isn't it?
I think unquestionably, without the mastermind network, we wouldn't have done what we've done. Just because, one, we wouldn't have known how to do it, and two, we wouldn't have been egged on or supported to do it. And having that network to kind of pick the phone up and speak to someone about a niggle. So I know if I've got a planning issue, I've got a good friend in my network that is kind of mastered the planning aspect, certainly in his area. So it's great to pick up the phone. If I've got a structural issue, then I know I can pick up the phone and speak to a friend of mine that will kind of FaceTime, and I'll be like, "What do you think of this?" And he'll be like, "Well, this." And likewise, from a kind of raising finance or refinancing issue, I hope to be able to give people value. I think so. Network is one thing, but also we've been fortunate to have a couple of really inspirational mentors, and they've been amazing. I've kind of throughout the year we had a couple of mentors, and they've both been prolific investors, property investors, and just being able to pick their brains, recognizing that they're 5-6 years down the line from where we want to be is so. I mean, there's so much value in that. There's so much currency in understanding that I can avoid a mistake just by speaking to someone that has probably made it already, and that will save me money. So yeah, the mentors have been exceptional.
I think that's a really interesting way to look at education and mentorship and mastermind programs as well. Of course, there's a cost to these sorts of programs, particularly if you want to be around the right people. And you could do some simple calcs. Okay, how many properties or how much business would I need to do to regenerate that capital to get a reasonable return on that investment? But there's also that hidden component of how much could this save me from making the wrong decisions? And I think the answer to that is potentially significant. The wrong decision on buying something just in the wrong place, or getting the spec of a property wrong, not quite getting the right amenity standards, and actually having to spend thousands to turn the house upside down again to satisfy an officer. And I've sadly seen all of these sorts of things before, but I think it's really interesting as well to hear you say that. I think we've dropped some bombs today, Mark. We've talked about the transition from job to business. We've talked about community and network. We've talked about some really great and powerful stuff. I am desperate to get onto your case study, though.
Oh, yeah, cool.
So this is how many bedrooms is this case?
It's 7, so it's a 7-bed HMO in Salford.
And I think you said actually 7 beds is sort of you've got a bit of a soft spot for 7 beds, have you?
I quite like sui generis. Yeah, it's so we've taken on that was an existing 7-bed, but we've also taken on. We had a couple of Liverpool units. They were running as 6, and then we took them through planning and made them 7. And we've got a 9-bed HMO in Manchester that we run as well. So I do quite like. I think it has to be done in the correct way, and you have to kind of foster this community aspect, which is really really easy to miss, but really difficult to do well. And we try to create those spaces where people genuinely want to hang out with each other. So we'll put Sky in, and we'll put business grade broadband in, so people can stream and work from home. Even more important now. But yeah, no, sorry to answer your question, Andy. I do quite like the 7.
Yeah, and it's an unusual strategy though, because most people would pursue the slightly smaller HMOs, up to the 6 beds, not have to do the dance with planning. But I think definitely the scale of economies makes the slightly larger HMOs bigger. Let's have a conversation about that shortly, because I think there are lots of pros and cons to larger HMOs, and planning is obviously one of them. But 300, you paid 330,000 for this property, so by no means was this a cheap piece of real estate. And your refurb cost, this is blowing my mind, and I'm wondering whether I'm misreading, but did you really only spend 14,000 on this, Mac?
Yeah, so if you think about the property was relatively okay. So it was a relatively vanilla kind of HMO. So all we did was paint and carpets.
So it was an existing HMO.
There was no planning app for this one. It was already running as a sui gen. There was some remedial work we had to do with the fire doors. That was quite pricey. They had to be adjusted and they had to be packed down, and that was a bit of a nightmare.
I mean, just on that point, that is the bane of my life. We get fire risk assessments done periodically, and we're inevitably always having to adjust fire doors, and the cost is phenomenal. Sorry, Mac, just to interrupt you. That's just a bugbear of mine.
No, likewise. So we've taken on a 5-bed unit in Salford. Again, an existing one that we're going to refurb, and again, issues with the doors where they're not kind of exactly lined up, and we're looking at a £400-500 bill just to kind of adjust them all. I'm just like, what? Gosh, why can't you not just? Yeah, so that's always one of those things. But generally speaking, for that one, because it was relatively good standard, it just needed modernising. And modernising was new furniture, paint and carpets. And it really changed the feel and look of the house. And relatively inexpensive thing to do. And the kind of value uplift on that was significant enough to kind of make it worthwhile doing.
Let's pause on that, because this is staggering. So I think, first of all, just to highlight to all of our listeners, and you've got to see Mac's case study here to really appreciate how incredible this looks. But to do this on a budget of 14,000, and this is something I'm often banging about on social media, I actually like to do smaller refurbs, get in, get out, move quickly, and we'll often try and spend between 12 and 20,000. So this is very much sort of in line with the sort of stuff that I really prefer to do as well, Mac. But you were sort of just under 360,000 all in, and you got a revaluation of 400,000 on this, which is staggering. So the first question, and I think the obvious question that we're all kind of desperate to ask you, is: did you know that was going to happen? Was that part of the plan? Did you need it to happen to recycle capital out?
So we knew that we'd get an uplift because we went for a commercial reval. So we knew that there was a margin to be made there. I might add, Andy, there's always expenses. So 14 grand was the kind of minimum that we spent on the refurb. But subsequently with HMOs, they get kind of, as you know, there's a lot of wear and tear in these houses, so it does cost a fair bit maintenance wise. I think that's reflected in the figures that I've put in there. But it was a pleasant surprise. I think it's worthwhile recognising that we didn't think we'd go that high, but we needed to pull it out to continue the growth. So we kind of managed. We've got 9 units now. And we're kind of looking to expand further, so we do need our capital back in order to grow. So yeah, it was a pleasant surprise, but we did we did go for more. But again, we need to kind of balance that risk versus maintaining the cash flow from the property. Otherwise, it just doesn't become economically viable.
Absolutely. Your return on capital goes up, but actually
Completely.
your net cash flow and then your yields start to get squeezed.
Yeah.
So at the back end, after all costs, it's netting over £2,000 a month, which is in line. I would imagine that is very much in line with perhaps not your sort of last salary as a pharmacist, but certainly as a pharmacist just getting into the industry, a professional job. That is certainly an income, isn't it?
Yeah, no. Obviously, we've got the capital growth that we kind of forecast for the next 5 to 10 years. Our plan is to not sell anything if we can help it. So hopefully we can have a decent retirement. But yeah, the cash flow wise, it's a decent property. It's one of our favourites. We've got a couple of Liverpool ones that are now performing very well. Yeah, that's it's nice to have the income coming in.
Well, I'd recommend everyone goes and checks this out. The full case study is inside the HMO roadmap. The pictures of before and after, so you can see exactly what Mac has done, and on all of the juicy numbers, and all of the costs that are in there as well. But I think you'll find it's a really inspiring case study. Let's have a chat then about the pros and cons of large HMOs. So I've got lots of experience managing large HMOs. And one of my favourites is one of my 7 beds. It performs really well, but it is a 7-bed student let, and so the group's cohesive. Actually, often the guys that move in there, they stay for recurrent years as well. So we have a really low churn rate, and we've got, I would say, some students who we've always had students that really value the accommodation that we provide, and I think in part that's because of where a lot of my HMOs are located, the type of university and the type of students. Professional HMOs can be a little bit different, and I have often found it tricky to manage large HMOs, certainly the professional ones. And you touched on maintenance. So what challenges have you found, Mac, with larger HMOs? I can see you smiling as I ask you the question. So you've probably got a list in your back pocket, haven't you?
Yeah. So God, where do I start? I think challenges is so they do get that there is a significant amount of wear and tear. Also, the expectations for things to work. That not that things don't work, but I think the reactive time in order to fix things, the expectations is a lot higher.
Yeah. Do you find that your tenants are impatient or expect almost immediate responses or resolutions to things?
I think quite rightly they want things done timely, and we always kind of strive to get things done in a really timely manner. So for instance, we had a leaking window, a Velux window. It wasn't a Velux, it was in the same property. So we looked at repairing that, and it transpired that it was the old wooden kind of window. So we replaced it for a new Velux, and that cost us, best part of a few £100. But during that time was COVID, so we were kind of struggling to get the part. In that period, there was no kind of recognition that this is quite a difficult, the environment is quite difficult to get things. So I think maintaining communication with the young professional students is really key, because rightly they're paying for a service, and they're paying for an ability to not have to think about certain things. Whereas when you're managing the overall property, so like the house that we live in, when something gets broken, I will fix it, but I know when I'm going to get it done. Whereas I think some of our young professionals quite rightly want things done immediately, and I mean later on that day, which is quite difficult to manage, because we've got a finite workforce, and tradespeople are really difficult to get hold of, rightly so. So there is something about managing the expectation there, but also what we try to do is foster an ability for our tenants to kind of work things through. So we work with some brilliant managing agents, and they will always provide them with information about what to do in emergency, who to call out, troubleshooting, and things like that, which is useful.
Yeah, and these are some of the points we're often talking about inside the community, aren't they? How people manage their emergency procedures, how people manage the expectations of tenants. And I'm big on proactivity, and I think this is kind of what you're talking about as well. Proactivity over reactivity. I think there is this ever increasing expectation, particularly from professional tenants, but we see it in the student market as well, of things to be done very quickly, of communication to be sort of on demand. And it's really tough in a mechanical business like managing property to actually do it. And I think, particularly in a world that we've been in the last 18 months, and now post-pandemic, where construction's booming, and actually getting hold of basic materials, getting hold of or getting your tradesmen to sites because they're so busy and so in demand is actually incredibly challenging.
Absolutely.
And it's very difficult to manage people's expectations. We try and set those from the very beginning with the welcome packs, with the communication that we set out, and we regularly remind people when we can see frustration creeping in. And we often find that actually just communicating, even if it's just a holder, say, we know, thank you so much, we're trying our best, here's our expectations about when we're going to get it done, and just constantly updating them about changes. We find that communication piece is absolutely key. And if that breaks down, the relationship can break down. So even when things do take a bit longer, or when naturally you've got things that go wrong that aren't that obvious. We had a leak recently in summer, and we still don't know how all of this water penetrated the house and actually brought down a first floor ceiling.
Wow, right.
We definitely know it was from outside, but to explain this to a tenant and actually get them to genuinely understand and believe that this isn't an obvious fix, that it isn't, a radiator or the shower upstairs, is often quite challenging. And I often find myself managing our business as being the last stop when tenants get so frustrated, they're on the verge of formal complaints, and I have to kind of step in. And I often find that just picking the phone up and having a call can diffuse pretty much any scenario with a tenant. But what do you find, Mac, and how do you manage this sort of stuff?
So we engage with managing agents that really know how to manage HMOs, because they're a different beast, aren't they?
They are.
So we've so the solve for the case study is a guy who was introduced. We were introduced through the network, and he's also an ex-masterminder, so he knows exactly what he's doing, and he's brilliant, and his team is good, and they're really proactive, and they always give me the heads up when something's wrong, and we kind of get to this relationship where we're working together on it, so it feels like a shared asset rather than our asset. And again, I think that's quite an important thing to do, whereas maybe some of the larger chains are stretched so thin that they can't dedicate the kind of personal aspect of managing HMOs. So I think engaging with an agent that knows exactly what they're doing is fundamental to that. And I think you're right, proactively going out and looking for things to fix rather than having things explode is useful, because from a maintenance perspective, again, it's easier to sort things out before they happen.
Absolutely. 95% of making this business work is managing tenants and managing properties well. Actually, the buying bit and the getting the finance together, while it seems difficult at first, actually, in the grand scheme of things, and when you look at the timelines and how long you want to own these things, that's actually the easy bit. The rest of it is the hard work of kind of managing the tenants and keeping those rooms filled and keeping the property in a good condition so that it's always a popular choice.
And I think you're right. Over a long enough time period, your mistakes will probably become diminished. But purely by 20 years later, if you didn't have a great deal, it's probably turned out to be a good deal anyway, because you'd expect the kind of capital appreciated to improve or increase over that period of time. So that's, I guess, one of the attractions of property, is that it allows you to it doesn't allow you to make mistakes, but if you're over a long enough time period, I think your mistakes are you'll be okay. And likewise, if you're looking after your properties really proactively, then you've got some really decent assets there that you can take into the future.
Yeah, property can be very forgiving, but you've just got to nurture it.
Absolutely.
And the truth is, it's just not a set and forget strategy. It's just not that sort of business model.
People always think of it as passive, right? And I don't buy that. There's nothing passive about it.
We've got to bleep that word out on the show, Mac. Mac, I've got one last question I want to ask you. It's been an absolute pleasure chatting to you. And I said before we kicked off, because it's your first podcast and you've been brilliant, superb guest. Knew you would be. But I said it would just be like having a chat in the pub, and I've got no doubt you and I could go down to the pub, have a few pints, and just keep chatting about this for hours. But I've got one question that I really want to ask you, and I think a lot of our listeners could take a huge amount from this, depending on what you say. And that is one piece of advice, Mac. If you could give and share one piece of advice with anybody who's maybe just that few steps behind you, still in the job, but recognise that they want to be full-time in the property business, they want to build a HMO portfolio, what one piece of advice would you give to them?
I guess it's so difficult. I think I guess the fundamental of doing anything new or stepping outside of your comfort zone, you need that support network, I think. And again, I say it again, the mastermind group that I have and continue to have, even despite it being finished, are the kind of backbone of everything that we've done. So having that network and support is really, really important, because then you realise that you're not the only person that's doing this, or things that you're, because it's quite a lonely journey. So it's I guess it's recognising that you've got value to add, but also there's a huge amount of value to gain from a network as well.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I couldn't agree more, and I think that would probably be my one single piece of advice as well, Mac.
But Andy, can I just interrupt you? You before this, you did promise me a pint, and I want it recorded. I want this on record. You did say you would buy me a pint, but you were saying we might. I want it on record that you said you are definitely buying me a pint.
Mark, I will definitely buy you a pint, and right. I'll come over to Manchester, it's not far, and we'll meet, and we'll have I think we'll probably have a few pints, to be honest, won't we? And you know what? I think we deserve a few pints after the couple of years we've had and not being able to go in a pub. Hopefully we can remember where the pubs are.
Do you remember pubs? Oh, God.
Yeah. Mac, it has been an absolute pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you so much for coming and joining us and sharing your story, and lots of really powerful insights that you have shared today. Thanks,
Andy. Thanks for having me. It's an absolute wonderful experience. I'm glad I put my clean t-shirt on as well.
Thanks so much, Mac. And certainly, looking forward to getting you back on the show some point in the future, because I have no doubt you're going to go on and do some more incredible stuff in this industry. Likewise, Andy. I'd love to see what happens next in your future. It looks really exciting. Thanks so much, Mac.